You may find yourself in the position of listing agent representing the seller and the buyer is unrepresented. You offered the buyer representation, the buyer declined, and for whatever reason, the buyer is refusing to have representation. Okay, fine, but you need to protect yourself, and you can do that by incorporating this form into the transaction, the Buyer Non-Agency Agreement, C.A.R. Form BNA. It's one page, far from perfect, but it does have important verbiage that will help protect you because you don't want an unrepresented buyer to accuse you during or even after a transaction closes, even years after a transaction closes, because that buyer might say, I was just this innocent consumer and this licensed, experienced real estate professional told me to do this or that, and I did it, and it went wrong, and now they should be punished because they misled me or they deceived me. You don't want that to happen. And to prevent that, you can start by having this form added to the transaction. Now, I'll go through it. It's very quick, very simple. But also, I want to say, do not give a buyer any more assistance than you would a buyer's agent. If a buyer's unrepresented, that doesn't mean that you offer additional guidance. If a buyer's agent called you and said, hey, how many days is your seller looking for an escrow? Okay, that's reasonable. You're offering some insight. Oh, they're looking for 30 or 45. That's normal. That's a normal question from a buyer's agent. If a buyer calls you and says, hey, what's a customary time frame for this? What's a customary time frame for that? Or can you help me write an offer? The answer is no, absolutely not. Now, even if you have this form which protects you, specifically paragraph 2 protects you, do you think if you had this form filled out, but then you go on to fill out a purchase agreement for a buyer and assist them with a bunch of emails about customary timeframes and what they should ask for in a request for repairs, do you think you'll be protected? Absolutely not. Just because you have this form doesn't mean it gives you a license to go and unofficially represent a buyer. You can still be held liable by the buyer. So the point is that not only do you need this form to spell it out explicitly in writing that you're looking out for the seller's best interest exclusively, but you also need to not do anything for the buyer. If the buyer chooses to be unrepresented, they are on their own. They need to figure out how to write an offer. They need to hire an attorney or an agent or ChatGPT or just write it out on a notepad and send it by carrier pigeon to you. Whatever they do, you cannot do it for them. Okay, let's get in the form. Seller's name here, property address and information right here, the name of your brokerage here. Very easy. Now, this section 2, highlight it if you're going to give them a hard copy. This is the most important part because it's saying seller's broker does not represent buyer and seller's broker will not be buyer's agent. And then it goes on to explain a little bit more. Then we go down here to paragraph 3. There's awkward verbiage. This form is far from perfect, but it's better than nothing. We check box 2. Because it's acknowledging the buyer is not represented by another broker. Now, one thing I can't stand about this form is that it calls itself an agreement. You don't need an agreement to state the obvious. If the buyer has waived having a representative, then you just need to give them advisory that you, the listing agent, you are working exclusively and only for the seller's best interest, not the buyer's. And this is nice down here that the buyer's advised to seek real estate, legal, tax, all sorts of assistance from the appropriate professionals. That's another very helpful clause. So that's why you're going to have this in here where you're having, see how it says buyer signature here? So it's good that the buyer signs for proof of acknowledgement, but as long as you send this to the buyer, a buyer could refuse. I'm not signing that agreement. Okay, no problem. I have proof of delivery, and I even have proof of delivery by you refusing to sign. I have an email that shows that you got it because you need the buyer to acknowledge it, not agree to it. This should be an advisory or a disclosure, not an agreement. You don't need the buyer to agree to the obvious. You're not forming a contract here. You're telling the buyer, listen, I work for the seller. You're on your own, and I'm not helping you. And again, if a buyer asks for help, just say no. That's it. If you have any questions, please leave a comment. Thank you.